Hello everybody, and today I am somewhere I've not been for quite some time. The car park of VW HQ here in Milton Keynes. And it's a somewhat bittersweet experience. I'm so happy to be here filming once again. But as you can probably tell, it's a little bit empty. I've been told they have over 1,000 desks in the building and only about 30 people at any one time because most of the staff are still working from home. But we're here, and unlike all of my previous visits, I'm not looking at an Audi. Instead, today is my first ever time with a Skoda press car, and it's a very important Skoda because today we are looking at the new Enyaq IV, or as they're probably going to call it in America, Enyaq the Fourth. Now, this is a pretty significant car for Skoda as a brand because it's their first sort of all-electric car or all-electric SUV anyway, and really this is something people are buying a lot of. But the Enyaq really needs to impress because, let's face it, 5 years ago you release a car like this and everyone would be very impressed, but now all-electric cars are sort of 10 a penny, and we've already seen some of the Skoda's stablemates too in the form of the recently announced Audi Q4 e-tron and the VW ID4. So what makes the Enyaq stand out then versus its sister cars? Well, here in the UK you've got two basic models to choose from, the 60 or the 80, and they're named for their rough battery capacity, so about 60 kilowatt hours and about 80 kilowatt hours. And the entry price of this is quite a bit less than the recently announced Audi Q4. In fact, depending on how you specify them, it's anywhere between a sort of about £5,000 and £10,000 less, and has a larger battery pack, albeit slightly less power. This car is actually the base model 60, and I'm very happy to have this because press cars can often be the sort of nice, highly specified, fully loaded examples that very few people really ever buy. This is a much more real-world example of what you're going to get. It's the 60 Loft, and I'll explain the Loft bit in a moment. So you've got a 62 kilowatt hour battery, you've got a roughly 180 power motor, and here's the really cool bit. Like the Audi and the VW, the motor is mounted at the back. So yes, this car is rear-wheel drive. In fact, both the models are. There is no all-wheel drive Skoda Enyaq available, certainly at present. So this is the entry-level car. Once you've chosen whether you want your 60 or 80 kilowatt battery pack, you've then got a number of different trims to choose from. They are slightly bafflingly named. You've got Loft, Lounge, Lodge, Suite, and Eco Suite, and all of the interiors have some nice little eco touches about them, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. First off, let's have a look at the car. I think it's actually a pretty good looking thing. It's sized just about right, and it's a useful size. There is room in the back, there is plenty of room in the front, but most impressively, if I get my lovely assistant to come around the back, there is actually decent room in the boot, because I had concerns with the motor and everything being down here. That would mean there wasn't a lot of room for stuff in the boot, and that really would render this kind of car useless for the families who are probably going to be buying it. In fact, I was quite wrong. The very last press car that I had on the driveway, in fact it's still there, it's going to be collected in a couple of hours, was a Bentley Bentayga. And I don't feel like I'm getting a lot less space in this. It is a fairly sort of boxy shape, but that means that it's practical. You've even got lots of storage under here, and the best bit about any Skoda, little ice scraper hidden in the boot too. In fact, Skoda's slogan now is simply clever, and their idea is that the whole car's full of nice little touches, some of which I've found already and some of which I'm sure I'm yet to discover. But let's take a little look inside. So I'll allow my camera person to stick her head through here, and I'll join you on the other side, and we'll talk about what the interior is like. Your 5 different trim levels are separated by only a sort of few £100s each. None of them are particularly extortionate. I note that even this one has an electrically adjustable driver's seat, but the passenger seat is manual. Now, you've got what's sort of geography teacher grey kind of material, but it's soft here on the dash. Lots of cool funky shapes, like the door handles I really like. The way that they've sort of drilled the speaker grills is really very nice. Some familiar VAG switchgear in here, but that doesn't really bother me. A light headliner, a panoramic roof would be very nice to have. But you've got a funky 2-spoke steering wheel, which actually is a bit of an optical illusion because it's still got a little bit of detailing down here, so it looks like there are 3 spokes. These almost floating kind of dials here, and one of my favourite little features, now you've got 2 screens in this car, a very small one for the driver, a very big one for everything, but your volume control is actually this little bit here. So to increase the volume of the stereo, you simply drag your finger along there, which actually works really quite well. Gear selection down here, nice and small, loads of storage. Every single door apparently has enough space for a high-vis jacket and a 1.5 litre bottle of water. The seats I've only been in very, very briefly, but they're quite comfortable. You've even got a little coin holder down here. That's quite a sort of retro thing to have. A little storage bin here. In fact, this is massive. Yep, that goes all the way down, does that? That's a nice little touch, and overall it's a pretty good package. Now, of course, we should talk about options a little bit, and yes, there are quite a few to choose from on this car. In reality, there's nothing particularly amazing to talk about. You get comfort pack, lighting packs, all the kind of usual stuff you'll find in most VAG products. And if you want to know more about those, the best place to find out is on the Skoda website. But there are 2 options I'd want to draw your attention to. First off is the fast charging option. Now, the 60 kilowatt hour car can have a 100 kilowatt fast charge as an option. And it's less than £500. I would have that, because if you have that and you go to a fast charging station, which is becoming increasingly more common, you can charge this car from nothing to 80% in well under an hour. And that, to me, an hour for me is the benchmark. If I can get a full charge out of a car in an hour or near enough, that's decent. The 80 kilowatt version, you then get 125 kilowatt charging capacity. So not quite as quick as the Audi e-tron, but pretty damn good. If you're putting 125 kilowatts into a car, that's taking a lot of juice. And that means that you can get quite a way in not too long. The best bit, with the 80 kilowatt hour version of this car, the official WLTP range, 333 miles. That's amazing. More than 300 miles. That's the kind of range that I think is really going to start tempting people into cars like this. And this is particularly good because it's not extortionately priced. This exact car, as specified, is about £40,000. This is not a UK car. As you probably noticed, the steering wheel is on the wrong side. This is a Czech spec, because we apparently should be in Tuscany right about now, or somewhere like that, testing this car. Instead, we have Milton Keynes, and in reality I think this is a much better place to test a car, because most people watching are probably going to be driving it on roads like this rather than down the Amalfi coast. The other option that you can have on this, which is a fairly hefty one at £1,000, is the air pump, the heat pump. So this is a new way of heating the air coming into the car, and in particularly cold conditions, so sort of, you know, sub-zero, it makes the car a lot more efficient, makes much better use of its battery pack. In fact, in certain conditions, up to 30% more range, although I don't think in this country we'd ever experience that. Nonetheless, it's still going to make a tangible improvement to the way that the car can go, or more accurately, how far it can go. So that is something that I would have. The rest of it is all much of a muchness. Now, I did say about some of the cool eco features. Now, this car, like I said, is the base loft specification, but if you go for the one above it, the Lodge, you get an interior which has seat covers made from a combination of ethically sourced new wool and polyester made from recycled plastic bottles. In fact, I believe even this car has some plastic bottle sort of material in it somewhere. The Eco Suite also has a nice touch in that it has real leather, but rather than being dyed by chemicals, they actually use olive trees to stain it. That's quite cool. Those are the little touches that I'd really like to see introduced in more cars, because whether you are a fan of EVs or internal combustion, I think there's lots and lots of ways we can make our cars a little bit better for the environment without really losing anything. So I praise Skoda for having done that. But there's only so much we're ever really going to find out about this car in a car park in Milton Keynes. So why don't we take it out and see what she drives like. You know what? There is an awful lot to like about the Enyaq, starting with the ludicrous turning circle. Watch this. This car will nearly turn back on itself. I swear one of the people in the design team must have worked on a London cab. It's incredible. The driving position is also very good. You can get comfortable quite quickly. The little screen down here isn't showy, but it gives you everything that you need. This one is nice and big and clear. Seats are very supportive. Okay, not in terms of lateral bolstering, but they seem nicely sculpted for the human form. and you appreciate all the tiny little Skoda touches, the little parking ticket holder, stuff like that. This also appears to have rendered the Audi e-tron entirely redundant overnight, because it feels like it's got pretty much the same amount of room, has more range, and is half the price. So good luck to anyone that's got one of those they're trying to sell. There are, however, some things that I don't like. First off, despite this car's claimed 250 odd mile range, the moment I got into it, having been freshly charged, it said it only had about 160 miles of range in it, which I've now dropped down to about 133, although I think I've done more than 30 miles. What I suspect is going on here is the car, of course, has taken its average economy from the previous 1,000 or so miles that it's done, and it's therefore being a little bit pessimistic. I'm hoping in the real world that will not be the case, because that would be something of a sticking point. I'm also very annoyed at the fact there doesn't appear to be a way to easily disable the lane keep assist. In most recent Audis, there's simply a button you press and it goes away. In here, the lane keep is very intrusive and not easy to disable, because you've got to press a button down here to bring up the menu, then you've got to tap lane keep, then tap another button to turn it off, and that to me seems, well, almost dangerous. The ride is also something I'm not quite in love with, because it seems to be trying to strike a bit of an awkward balance. This particular model, being the entry level, the sort of entry trim as well, I think should just try and be the comfy one, the nice, decent, all-round daily drivable one. But instead there is a bit of choppiness to the ride, there is a firmness that I wasn't really expecting. Now granted, I have just got rid of the Bentley as I mentioned, but also this morning I came up in my Honda S2000, so my standard for ride comfort isn't set all that high at the moment. This I think really should be a little plusher out of the gates. If you get the 80 kilowatt hour version, you can have a sport line trim, and that one I'd expect to handle and feel a little bit more like this. Now this sort of stuff, this is my little torture test for turning around, and here is an area where the Skoda scores highly. Only has the reversing camera, but with that turning circle, auto hold and everything else, maneuvering in this car, very easy. The glass runs all the way pretty much front to back, so even though I'm on the wrong side of the car, actually it's not been too daunting to drive around this morning. There is one option that I forgot to talk about this morning, which is somewhat important, and it's the crystal grille option. That's best explained by showing it to you. Here it's this. Now can you all do me a favour, and if you are going to buy an Enyaq the 4th, can you just say no to the crystal grille? Let's stop this trend before it takes root. Fake front grills that glow in the dark are a gateway drug to underglow. And as much as I have a bit of nostalgia for the odd underglow, it deserves to stay where it is, in Need for Speed Underground 2. So let's not let that trend start up. However, the drive of the thing is really pleasant. The steering is very direct. You can place it on the road nicely. I did have one incident earlier though where all the car's warning systems went haywire and it started shouting at me for crossing a white line when I wasn't actually anywhere even close to it. Yes, I know I'm on the left-hand side of the car and all that jazz, but I then deliberately tried to go over a white line afterwards and it didn't do the same. So obviously had just a moment of panic. This is an early car and these things can happen. It's not happened since and it wasn't really too much of an issue, but just something worth noting. The stereo quality in here isn't great, but being an entry-level car, I'm not too worried about that. I'm sure you can get better versions. I apologise for the slightly rushed nature of things in this video, but I have just 3 hours to do everything I want with this car, and that's not long. I'm driving this car down a route I know fairly well, and it's a pretty demanding road, and I've got to say, it's taking it really well. It's actually pretty enjoyable. Is the rear-wheel drive bit making a difference? With this kind of power, I don't think so. The 180 horsepower means the car feels quite brisk up till about 40 mile an hour, then it tails off fairly quickly. The 82 kilowatt hour version has of course a bit more power, about another 20 horses or just over 200, but I think may also weigh a little bit more as well. So whether it's tangibly quicker or not, I couldn't say, but I doubt it. If you want a really quick EV, it's going to throw you into the back seats, this is the wrong car. You'd be looking at a Tesla Model 3 or something like that. But as a car to live with, if this will actually do the range that they claim for it, it's not a bad product at all. I actually do rather like it. A lot of cars feel either simply wrong or simply right, kind of out of the box. And the Enyaq to me actually feels inherently right. I am a big Audi fan. I've never actually owned one, but I've been very fortunate to sample a huge number of their products. Yet I have to say the Skoda does seem to have an identity of its own, and there's just enough little features that in a daily driver would make this something I'd give real serious consideration to. Brakes are nicely judged, throttle is pretty decent, it's quite responsive. So is this car worth the premium over the Kia e-niro as an example? Yeah, actually I would say that it is. I don't think I'm really missing anything from in here. Spec seems generous. I've even got heated steering wheel, get heated seats, get your AC and all that jazz. Navigation actually works quite well. I was using the car's own built-in nav, and that's very nice. The extra space in the car is definitely usable, but as a package, it's not compromised if you are living in a city or whatever. It's not overly large. I like it. I like it a lot. And I look forward to hopefully spending more time with it in future. But for now, the Enyaq the 4th gets a thumbs up from me.